I think I'm streaming, and I'm not quite sure. I will spend the first moments confirming that that's true. Clicking here. I think I'm quite sure. And there I go. Okay. Shut up, me. Good. So I've started with my standard loop, feedback loop of streaming. I'm not sure if anyone's going to join today on this Sunday, but just to keep me occupied and focused, I'm going to be here. And I'm going to be streaming. I guess I'll keep this window open as I did last time for chat purposes, even though I haven't even started sharing my screen yet. So let me do that. There we go. And now even, as you can see here in this crazy mirror dimension, I have a topic. I learned the bare minimum of OBS, and if I even say something like testing, that should show up in the upper right hand quadrant of my screen. Well, as we'll see, well, you probably already see that if you're watching, but I'll need to see that in the YouTube channel, or I'll need a command tab back to the other window. But let's wait, because now it should work. Echo testing. Yes. And when I type that, come on. Nope, did not work. Okay, it's not on my screen, as I could have figured that out here. So let me do this. YouTube, I need to give it this crazy thing. Where is it? Pop out chat. Pop out chat. Copy the website address. So it looks like I got a new streaming ID. That's not fun, but let's see if that works now. There we are. Amazing. Yay. Thank you, Redion. Okay, I'll close that though, and I'll go back there. And yeah, I'll probably still pop into this window to read it myself because I haven't yet set up an iPad, but getting slightly more professional. Anyway, as you can see in the upper right hand corner of the screen, I'm going to work on this database migration tool called Migraine that I started work on last time, which is basically just a replacement for, well, for me personally, for Flyway, because I do not love that Flyway paywalls a lot of features, and also that this whole domain is relatively straightforward, though since the end of last session I did some more coding, and it, obviously became somewhat more complicated. The real world is always something more complicated. So I'll just walk through that code and then figure out where I want to go next. Obviously no pressure to stick around. Hopefully some more people show up eventually so I feel less absurd. But whatever. All for posterity or for my own whatever mental engagement. By streaming, you prevent yourself from going down Wikipedia rabbit holes or browsing other ends of the internet or just staring at the wall because you feel a sort of ambient pressure to charge forward and possibly to entertain, though I'm not sure if I have the energy to go that far. Okay, so what is going on? Well, since last time, I created a whole bunch of specs, not too many specs, but maybe looking at the specs will help us understand what is happening. I also created snapshotting, so that feature that's behind a paywall is actually really quite trivial to implement, and it took me basically, I think I kept working on it later that night. So just all in a day, you can get a very basic version of Flyway with their fancy paywall features, which makes sense. It's something, when you paywall things, you have to make arbitrary selections, and you probably want to put things behind that paywall that people want to pay to go over. It just always feels a little arbitrary, especially when it's something that is sort of generally applicable to and it could be useful to most people. I really don't know how you're supposed to work around it besides paying them money. Or using another tool, or creating your own open source fork, which is what I'm doing, I suppose. It's not a fork, but open source alternative. Great. So, going to talk myself and whoever watches in the future through what's happening. So on a fresh database, this will start from the latest snapshot. That's kind of the whole point of snapshotting. Maybe I can explain that in some comments. So if I'm going to have some migrations, M1, M2, M3, eventually you're going to make a migration. Actually, here's the example. So I have a create users migration, which would have been the first migration. Then we create a posts table on top of that, referencing the users table. And then we create the snapshot migration. And what that's going to do, it's going to take basically everything that's come before it and just dump the, the result of the schema at that moment. Yeah, actually, I thought a little bit more about this as I was falling asleep, and came up with a fairly decent representation of like what a migration is. Not that this is terribly deep or interesting, but if a migration were a type, it's really just a function that transforms a schema to a schema. So that's what that is. And we were talking a little bit about invertible migrations. And what that would mean, if migration is a function from schemas to schema, that means the identity migration is simply the identity function, right? It's just a function that takes a schema and returns that same schema. And the sort of the law of invertibility that we were talking about is that if you have some migration 1 and you compose that with migration 2, if M2 is an inversion of M1, then you're going to get back the identity schema. And another way of saying that, I mean, it's all quite obvious, but it's just that if you, create users and then drop users, you're going to get back whatever the state of the database was before you created users. So maybe there were some other tables in there, but after creating and then dropping users, you're going to get back to that same previous state. So you could have ran this function of creating users and then dropping users, or you could have just run the identity migration. And so that's kind of a definition of an invertibility. And if you want to come up with an inverse function or an invert function, which will be a goal for us eventually, where we'll sort of optionally, because you can't invert every SQL script, but we'll want to get back maybe a migration that if we apply that, will satisfy this law and get us back the identity. So if we take a invert of create users, that should get us back a sum of drop users. And therefore, any migration composed with its inversion will equal identity. It's basically the very, I don't know why I'm doing this, but it's fun. It's fun. Obviously, that's not what a migration is actually represented as in our code. It's only sort of like a theoretical analog. A migration is a SQL file. But when we run those migrations, we run them on our schemas, and they alter the schemas in some way. So it's just a functional way of considering a migration, and maybe about exploring some of its properties or nailing down exactly what we mean by an inverse. But it's all intuitive, so this is just probably, if anything, complicating things. But it's fun to do. It's fun to complicate things. Back to the point of snapshotting, which is that we're going to have a series of migrations and then a snapshot, which basically is just the state of the schema that is a result of pushing it through M1, M2, M3. So we start with some, empty schema, and then we sort of pipe that through these three migrations we call M2 after M1 after M3. So we're creating all these tables, and that's going to get us back some schema 3, let's call it. So schema 0 is the empty schema, and then we're going to get back schema 3. S3, in this case for snapshot actually, this snapshot is going to basically be a script that will create exactly schema 3. So it's basically the sum total of M1, M2, and M3. So that's exactly what this V2 snapshot is. So we have V1 migration, create users, create posts, and then the snapshot at V2 will have been basically, what is the state? How do you create the entire state of the schema if you ran all the migrations up to this version, including this version, in order? And the way I've decided to denote that is V2 underscore snapshot. And that's just because I want these to be ordered always. Actually, one of the things I was thinking about, like how, if I'm just going with this default version-based naming convention, which seems to be reasonable, a lot of, I think what Flyway does, and other things in the past that I've used, have stuff like this, V1, V2, and these get ordered nicely, create other table, whatever. But then the down migrations will have a totally different prefix. It'll be like D2. So this would be like for dropping the other table. And of course, that's going to be sorted totally differently, and in this case would appear alphabetically above all the other migrations. So what I decided to do, and it's not a work of genius in any way, but just to do something like this. Or maybe, I forget if it's all caps, just something like this. And if I have a snapshot that snapshots up until that point, do there. So everything will just be readable from top to bottom linearly with the sort of the default sorting that occurs in IDEs. Wow, what a contribution to this space. Nothing terribly exciting. But okay, so that's what a snapshot is. It's this snapshot of up until that point, basically the accumulation of all the previous migrations, or rather a representation of how to create the schema after running them, because some of these intermediate migrations could create and drop tables, and we wouldn't want to both create and drop a table in this final snapshot. That would be pointless. Basically, we're just going to do a database dump and throw the DDL into the snapshot. And one of the ideas is also to create a command line tool for that. So something like Migraine Snapshot would do that for you, and maybe have you select which migration would you like to snapshot until. And the idea is this would create a fake database, possibly with test containers. I'm not really sure the best way of doing this, but maybe test containers would work. That would be my hacky first thought. And then run all the migrations up until that point. So you'd say, yeah, run up until version 5. So then this would run V1 through V5 on a test container, and then basically dump the schema into a file prefixed with whatever version you selected. So it'll create a V5 snapshot underscore whatever. Maybe it should just be .sql. I have the option here to give it a name, but it's kind of obvious. It's just the snapshot at that point. Why force the user to name it? I'll probably remove that naming there. Yeah, so that's one feature idea. There are a whole other bunch of little problems, but anyway, maybe I'll just keep those notes. I'll keep this thing messy. But it does work, and how it does work, let me go to snapshot spec, is that, well, on a fresh database, it just finds the most recent snapshots. So Migraine will just find the snapshot with the highest identifier and start from there. So it's going to, in this case, start from V2 snapshot, ignoring V1 and V2, even though it never ran those. It's a fresh database. And then it's going to obviously run any migrations that come after that snapshot. So we get to just fast forward ahead to the first snapshot and then run from that point on. If the database has ever migrated previously, you have to ignore snapshots. And that's just because the snapshot isn't migratable. It has to start from there. It creates everything. You could have certain rules I don't know. It would just be really weird. A snapshot is kind of starting from zero every time. It's not really, if we go back to that metaphor of a migration being a function from schema to schema, it's not really that. It's a snapshot is just a schema, or a function from unit to schema. Yeah, or it should be theoretically. It's obviously just a SQL file. We can't prevent anyone from doing anything, but that's how we should think about it. And why is this useful? Well, this is useful if you are deploying your app to, a new server that has no previous data. Chances are, though, in production, you're going to want to keep the same data around. So mostly production uses these migrations. But if you're doing things like CI, or on a local development machine would be a really big example. If you have 5,000 migrations, at some point you can just create a snapshot and then not have to run through those 5,000 migrations. Instead, you just use the newest snapshot in local development when you run your tests, etc. And it's going to be a lot faster and simpler. And you can delete your old migrations, assuming those old migrations have already been run on every database that at least already has run migration. So it should be like production. Any kind of persistent databases you're not wiping out all the time. So you kind of have these two paths, right? Fresh databases, just find the latest snapshot. And if you've already migrated, ignore it. Great. Fun times. Don't know how this thing works. But yeah. hopefully that's interesting. Definitely helps to talk out loud. And so for testing purposes, I have this migrate folder method, which is currently private, where you just give it a path to the migration folder. And that's because the way I simulate these cases of having a fresh database versus a previously migrated database is I have this snapshot test, no snapshot, so I have this folder of migrations theoretically that just has the user's migration in it. And then I have another one that has users, posts, a snapshot, and another migration on top of the snapshot afterwards, which means that in the fresh database version, I want to give it this folder that has previous migrations and a snapshot and migrations after that. And then I'm making sure I have this other method that gets basically all the metadata from the database, that metadata table, which migrations we've run. I want to make sure we've only run create users and posts and the add slug to posts. And that's indeed what is true. So it never runs create users or create posts on this database. However, on a previously migrated database, we first migrate with the this version. So it only creates users. It has no snapshot. So it does run this migration. And then we simulate sort of, redeploying with more SQL scripts, with more migrations, by now running it on this full folder. And it will basically continue along from V2. It cannot jump right to the snapshot. It's already created users, and it sort of just needs to run these migrations. You can't, do anything else, right? You can't drop your users table because it might have data in it, and therefore you also can't run the snapshot because it would try to create a duplicate users table, and it would just not work. So we have to go with stick to just following migrations from V1 onwards. And so at the end, if everything works correctly, we just run all the migrations ignoring the snapshot, and that's what seems to happen in this test. So that's snapshots. And how does it work? It's all actually really kind of basic. I had to add this is the logic. It got a little more complicated from last time. Just checking if anyone has any comments, but no worries because there's only one person here, which is miraculous that anyone's here. But thank you for watching, or it's me logged in on two browsers. But thank you for being my rubber ducky today. My real flesh and blood rubber ducky. So the first thing is we get all the migrations from the migrations path, which is just a list of basically these files, their paths, their names, their IDs, parsed into a very basic data type that looks like this. The ID, the name, the path. Oh, and then there's this migration type, which parses based on that format what kind it is, up or down or snapshot. I haven't really implemented down migrations, but I know I want them. Great. So we're getting all those migrations from that folder. Then we find the latest snapshot. So we find the find.isSnapshot. Oh, actually, that's not going to be correct. I want to do find last, I think, actually. There we go. So one issue with this, and I should probably change that, is there's only one snapshot, so it would have found the first snapshot. And it did find the first snapshot because the first and last snapshots are the same. But if there's a second one, I want to find the last snapshot. So yeah, that was a bug. And then we want to get also all of the up migrations. I guess we might not need those in every... No, we seem to use them in... yeah, we do need all of the up migrations eventually. We're just going to drop some of them in some cases. So we have our latest snapshot. We have all of the up migrations. Because when we're migrating, we don't care about down migrations. That would be for rollbacks. Then we get the latest migration ID, and this is the latest ran migration ID. So I should probably, the last run migration ID, I'm not sure. Whatever, but this would be, the last migration that were executed. And then I just match on a pair of this. So if we have any migration that we've run, latest migration ID, then we're just going to drop from these up migrations until that point, right? So if we've already ran up to 2, then we just want the up migrations after 2. And then we're going to run those migrations in a transaction. I'm not sure if that needs to be in the name here, but now I've added also the ability to run these in a transaction, which wasn't happening before. So as you're running your migrations, if any one of them fails, it will roll back to before it started running those migrations. So you won't be sort of halfway along. Maybe that's actually not a good idea, and I should just keep it in whatever state it ended in, but probably not great if you have any kind of errors while running your migrations, and you probably don't want to be left in some halfway state. So it just rolls them all back. Yeah, hopefully that's okay. Great. Anyway, so that's the one case. So we don't care about snapshots at all, basically. If there's at least one previously executed migration, only execute newer up migrations. If there are no previously executed migrations and there is a snapshot, execute the snapshot and all migrations after it. And finally, if there are, if basically it's totally fresh and no snapshot, nothing's run, no snapshot, then we're just going to run all the migrations, all the up migrations, and not drop any. And that's basically it. And then I added some logic for running these all in a transaction, and some other stubs. But that's basically it. Though it is, it does work. But there's still a lot to do. I have a lot of notes, a lot of edge cases to handle, and we're up to 4 people. Welcome. As you can see now, I've added some fancy UI to my stream, and we're indeed continuing along on this a flyway competitor. So that should be fun. Well, it is fun in a way. in a way. It's a good small project, medium scoped project, and I need to figure out what I've done and what I will do next. I actually don't like at all the way these to-dos look in here, so I might just make myself a README. Actually, I have a README. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing, my giant stack of notes, to the README. And we'll start there. Do I have a README? README. I definitely do. There we go. So let's paste this in here, and then just delete a whole bunch of comment symbols that don't make any sense for Markdown. Hey, okay, great. So, notes. So yeah, we want helpful error messages, we want a CLI, we want a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm not sure if this goals thing is necessary. I might just actually have a big to-dos page. So we do want configurable database connections. Let me actually find every instance of this and make them all to-dos, so I can just mark what I've done already. Even though not all of these are to-dos, so that might not make sense. But now I can check this off. Does not seem to be very nicely rendered. Does it render it all right? It kind of renders it as a to-do. Oh, and it checks it off here, but not in the no sort of syntactic indication that that's happened. It's all quite ugly, but fine. I'll keep it like this. With this logic, would you be able to catch cases where there's some kind of version is missing? V1 is there, V2 is not there, but VT is there. Let's say someone mistakenly deleted the V2 script. So that's a great point. And I do have this section for sort of errors I want to handle. So let's talk about that. Yeah, there are a bunch of different cases one could handle. So, but let me write that one down, which is detect when migrations are missing. There's also sort of detect when migrations have been changed. So when a run migration or a ran migration, I don't know, I'm not sure. Which one sounds more natural to you? Having a ran migrations or run migrations? I think it would be run migrations because it needs to have ran, but just run is the past participle. I forget their grammar. Okay, I think when run migrations are missing. Already run? Executed? Maybe I'll just use the word executed. So yeah, when a previously executed migration is missing, that could be an error. Unless, I guess, you might have wanted to delete it if there were a snapshot before that. But I could ensure that, yeah, these did exist in chronological order. So V1, V2, V3, otherwise throw an error. So there's some edge cases there are missing unless there's a snapshot. Detect when run migrations have been changed. Does that matter unless there's a snapshot? No, I think if so yeah, what Flyway stores a checksum or a hash of the SQL code in your database and then compares it against what's in here. And I think that makes sense. That's good to validate. Obviously then you have to load every single migration and calculate its checksum every time you try to run your migrations, just to sort of validate that everything is cool in the world. But I think in this case, performance probably is not going to be much of an issue. I've never noticed a performance issue with Flyway, even though it apparently has been loading every migration script. And this is not run constantly during your application. It's one run on start. So it's probably okay to do that. And especially because, so low performance concerns really, because this is a sort of a once only activity, and really high safety guarantees, really high safety concerns, because this is like your production data. So I would agree probably with the way Flyway does it, and as you suggested, where we should make sure there are no gaps in IDs, unless there's maybe a snapshot, because then you could have deleted them. But maybe we should still make sure that, you could start at some higher ID, but then it has to be linear from that point on. So, starting from the latest snapshot. That makes sense to me. Cool. Oh yeah, so I've taken that note already. It's the problem with too many notes. Accidentally, I've got to start checking these off so I can remain more organized. If accidentally duplicated version IDs, yes. So that's if you have two migrations with the same ID. That's a problem. I actually don't think I can interactively prompt the user from like the normal migration flow that's run in your code base, because that's going to be run, in production, and we don't want to open up we just want to fail with an error message. However, the CLI should help user resolve ambiguity. So maybe we could suggest, hey, use this command, or just rather open up the CLI and it should make these observations. Postgres driver is missing. Okay, well that's just sort of the basic trying to get a migraine instance set up. There should be lots of nice errors, and help the user set up, make sure it has everything it needs, and warn for or throw errors for database connection issues. And this one's probably more important, that they haven't changed using checksum. And then a bunch of people were talking about doing dry runs. I have to think more about dry runs, but that's definitely something on the table after snapshots. And I guess I've done snapshotting, so I'm going to move snapshotting to the bottom of this list. And come on, be organized here. Snapshotting. I do not have a Snapshot CLI command, so that still needs to be done. I'll just make that above. Oh, these are at different indent levels. That's fun. Okay. Execute snapshots. So we have that. What have I done here? Editing migrations of users. Edited. Oh yes, and here's like a quality of life idea I had, which is if you do edit a migration locally, because that happens a lot, where you're just kind of messing around with code and you kind of don't want to, you're trying to basically create posts, let's say, because you want to add post logic to your application, and you write this migration and then you're messing around with the code and you realize, oh, I need one more thing. And then you just want to add, that one more thing, that stub, or what is it called? The slug. Slug is what I mean. And you want to add a slug to this, etc. Well, if you already run the migrations, which you have, most certainly, then it's going to give you that issue that says, hey, your hashes have changed, help, run. And that's not fun. And then you basically have to roll back. And, well, this doesn't even have rollback support yet, but we will add that. Anyway, it's just a bit of a bummer, perhaps. And it's very manual, and you have to know what to do. But I think that's such a common scenario that's the kind of thing where we can just do a little bit of extra work to make a nice quality of life improvement. So if the user has edited the most recently run migration and or like batch of migrations, so it notices that there's a hash conflict with v2, right, or the most recent run migration, and tries to run migrate again, obviously, it'll notice that error. Ask the user if they want to roll back the prior migration before running the edits. So basically we could, there's also some other ideas. You could like literally store the entire SQL in the database. I don't think I want to do that. The hash, maybe eventually that could enable some other cool things. But basically, I would just automatically roll back for the person and then rerun it. So just kind of like update those files. Though once again, we'd have to prompt the user. One of the difficult things to make this thing feel nice in general is when you write codes. when I have this migrate method, it's going to be called. Do I call this anywhere as an example? Yeah. Basically, you're going to call it in your application, kind of at the beginning of your application, saying, "Hey, migrate everything." Before I continue on with the rest of my application, we have to migrate the database. And that's going to run in production, and you're also going to run it, in staging and CI, and also in development. Probably going to run it a lot, the most in development. So it would be really great to add nice quality of life features to this, such that if something was missing, I forget what I just deleted. If you have a conflict where there are two migrations with the same ID, it could prompt you wherever you're running your program, like say, "Hey, which one of these, go into interactive mode." But I don't know, that's probably not a good idea anyway. Maybe that's the thing, just it could just print error messages and fail. Nice error messages that were easy to read. And then also give the user sort of commands they can run in the CLI. So I guess that would be the idea. Just say, okay, well, you have this issue. If you want to solve this very quickly, run migraine, whatever, resolve ambiguities. That's a silly command name. Disambiguate, something like that. Anyway, that's the idea. Run some kind of command. But yeah, there are a few other cases where it's just, how do we get a nice, does everything have to be done through the CLI? And it's definitely on my to-do list to have a nice CLI because it can enable a lot of helpful tools. For instance, migraine, new migration. Create users or what have you. And that should create a new V, whatever the most recent version is, V10, and probably even with, I don't have them here, but some kind of amount of preceding zeros. So once again, these are sorted correctly. And then, create users.sql and have it create that in your test folder. But of course, how is a CLI tool supposed to know where your resources folder is, right? We can't necessarily use the class path. Maybe we could. Maybe we would load a Java process and see where the class paths are of the current project. I'm not sure. Or there needs to be some config file. And do we have a migraine.conf file? And is that, in your user folder, or is it locally per project? But you wouldn't want to commit that because that's going to have your connection details to your local dev database, which are going to be different than production, than any of your other coworkers probably. Even if one thing that is shared would be maybe the location of the migrations folder. So it would be great just to be able to run this, but can you just run that? Or would it need to, you had to make a conf beforehand? Anyway, lots of little annoying things, I wish you could just run that. But I don't think that'll work. So I want to think about what's the nicest way of configuring this. If anyone has any ideas or has any other kind of tools that work like this, that have a good experience, that would be great. I think Rails does, but that's convention over configuration. So there is one place to put SQL migrations pretty much, and it knows how to read the config. There's one way to do config in Rails, so it can probably be configured in that same project. But yeah, maybe I should look to Rails for some ideas because they do some things very right when it comes to tooling experience. Okay. Hey again, Anthony. Welcome back. Hope you're doing well. wants some more migration content. Very exciting. I was saying I made some progress from last time. We have snapshotting. They all run in transactions. Just trying to organize my to-do list really, and make sure I then sort it, put it in the right order. And then pick some things off. So I have snapshots now. I do not have a CLI yet. Editing migrations. Yes, that's kind of a bonus feature. So I'll keep it towards the bottom. I'll try to vaguely sort them by priority. Oh man, but just doing that totally, it gets inserted in the wrong place and then breaks everything else. Maybe I shouldn't have. I was hoping Markdown would be a cleaner way of organizing this, but I'm not sure if that is the case. It looks okay like this, just not in code form. All right, so snapshot, we need a rollback for sure. Oh yeah, one of the interesting things, by the way, are going to be dry run. A lot of people on the sort of the Twitter thread where I said I was going to be doing this and asked for feature requests, basically, they said, do dry run, and dry run by default as well. So I'm not sure what by default would mean, other than sort of this would do a dry run, and then if you accidentally deploy this, it actually wouldn't migrate unless I guess there was like a configuration variable that was set to don't dry run, or you did something like, dry run equals false and you'd have to run that. But I think that would mostly be configured. So I'm not sure about the by default thing. I don't know, just due to the way you run this kind of application, this library, I think that might just be annoying. But certainly the CLI should have some kind of migrate. Maybe that should be by default dry run, and then you want to say actually. But for now, let's do that as in our pretend CLI language. And we want this to dump out some information. I think the way Flyway does it is it just kind of, it does the easy thing, which is prints out all of the SQL that it would have run in order. At least that's what I think, based on last time I glanced at their website. Maybe it does more fancy things. But the fancier things to do would be to do a couple of things. One would be to get the Schema Diff, so not just show like a list of, okay, so we were at V1 and then so basically we're going to, if we do dry run, it would actually only run V2 and V3. So then it would just print to your console, literally this string and then a dash and then this string. So that's like not terribly helpful. It doesn't communicate exactly what the real difference is. You have to read the SQL in order, and then maybe certain migrations that would have run would have affected themselves and affected previously run migrations. And then, it's just might be difficult to tell what actually changed, and you have to do that in your head. Jira competitor. Let's go. Oh no, I dropped the README. Okay. So a schema diff would be cool, but a schema diff would obviously, maybe not obviously, but would require us to do a couple things. One would be to parse out, basically read all the schema information using JDBC, which is possible, and put it into some kind of data structure that represents the schema, and then just do some diffing across those data structures and print out some nice diff format. So whatever, the users table changed like this. These were the added indices. We can make a fake little, like what we want the output to look like. And also someone recommended warning for non-reversible migrations, which I think is great. So dry run's not even the great one, but maybe I just do like preview migration or something. Or maybe just so people don't screw up, it could just be migrate, and then migrate for real would be the actual tool to migrate. So migrate would just fake it. But I like preview or something. Anyway, so there's that. But that kind of involves, if I want to do that right and not just sort of print out, I guess we have two versions. So version 1, MVP would just be, there we go. Copilot knows it was listening. I don't know how that's funny. Automatic migration tests. I've got to see what people actually mean by this. I'm guessing it's just run your migrations against a test container in your unit tests. So just run everything and make sure it's cool. That seems reasonable. Maybe, though, it's run each migration and add each migration, take a look at the schema and insert dummy data that fits the schema, and then keep doing that. So you'll know if you've screwed something up, like added a new column that you forgot to put not null in, I guess. Warn for new columns without, let's see if it knows. Without default values, yeah. And not null, I guess. So that would be dangerous. And I mean, it would fail in production, but it might succeed locally. I'm not sure. I've got to research needed. Ensure migration metadata is saved transactionally along with the migration. I did that. Yay! That can go at the bottom. Or I could just delete this. But I guess I'll put this at the bottom. And then the configurable CLI. Yeah, and this is kind of what I was talking about before. Like, how do I want to configure this? Target local database will change per project. Basically, yeah, migrations folder and connection info is what we need for now. Maybe other little settings those are the minimal number of configuration options. Where's the migration folder? How do you connect to the database? And then, yeah, I need to also in the program make it configurable when we call this. I don't think I exposed anything. Actually, I think I kind of did a basic one, but let me see. Migraine. It's kind of hard coded right now just to be, this path is the default path. And then I think I did make a constructor at least that will allow for, migraine custom. You can at least specify your JDBC URL, your username, and your password. So technically, you could use this as long as you put the migrations in the right place. This is kind of usable, and that's cool. I mean, barring all the bugs that I'm sure are in here somewhere, like the fact that it's not taking the most recent. No, now it is taking the most recent transaction. Let me actually fix that and push that up. Z migraine, and let's just add all this stuff. Add to-dos to README and fix snapshotting. I am not an incremental committer. Maybe I'll regret that one day, but I am when I remember to, but I'm not going to go through and break it up into 8 commits when I'm just hacking around. Maybe if there were other people working on this with me, I'd feel more embarrassed. Yeah. So going to the to-dos, just trying to get a sense of what is actually important to do next. I definitely think the CLI is important. The dry run, I could do an MVP, but the fun thing would be the Schema Diff. I've actually written code already that will, let me find, there we go. Yarn dev, SPT, that will do this. That'll dump out a schema and can do diffing. I was sort of working on this project basically for Scala.school, which is just a silly website for basically old symposium videos and other videos I make and some random writing and animations, just whatever, just a playground for doing full stack Scala stuff and trying to at least dog food a little bit of these tools. Zio, lots of Zio talks. But for that, I had this little admin interface that I'd made. Where is it, admin? That, looks ugly as hell because it's admin, but it sort of derives these tables using macros, and I can actually, these are fused into the database essentially, and I can muck with adding new events or publishing things. But also for this, I worked on a Schema Manager, which would basically be kind of what IntelliJ gives you, a way to view these these different tables and edit them. And add, well, I don't actually have a way to add columns, but you can do a migration editor and modify the table and stuff, and it's pretty oh, it changed since last time I looked at it. It's vertical now and looks different. But anyway, they have that tool. And that's basically what this is for the Scala school code base. So here's the structure of it. User has all these fields and of these types, and it's pretty ugly. And at the bottom, though, is basically a printout of the current schema of the table. Or rather, yeah, here it is. Oh yeah, it's the schema. So create table. You could basically run this and get that same table back. And then there's also a series of case classes, because basically the idea here was for this to do some Scala code gen based on a schema. But also, if I were to, let's look at the one at the bottom. Video, is that right? Video, right? So video currently has this stuff here, and at the bottom it has these fields here. So what I could do here, and this is the ugliest interface of all time, but let's add a field, I believe. Yeah, let's add a time type. Watched at, and save that. There's watched at. So now I get a few things. Up top, I get this migration that it will actually go from the current schema to this next schema. So it's going to alter that table and add that column. And I think for some reason have the wrong, I don't know if I've actually run this, because you can't have double quotes, you need single quotes. So that's broken. But besides that, it does do this diffing, which is kind of cool. So it basically, has in memory a version of a schema, has the actual schema, and then diffs them, and diffs them, and the generation between the diff is basically a migration to go from the old version of the schema to the next version of the schema. And of course, it also will add, the fields to the case classes and all that. So that's a fun project that I should finish. But I do have all this code in here that basically has representations of schemas. It can dump the schema out of the database. That's how it's getting this, because it's the actual schema from the database, and represented it in Scala sealed traits and case classes and whatnot. And then render it as a DDL. So that would be very useful for snapshotting. Grab the schema, and then this is the snapshot, basically, file. So I need that for snapshotting, for that Snapshot CLI command. And then also in this code base is the ability to get, not quite diffs, but migrations, but easily I could build atop of that logic diffs, some kind of diff. So I'm going to reuse all that stuff. So that's all fun. I should really finish this, because that would have been a cool thing. It's so ugly, though. But yeah, I'll work on that. But I can steal code from it, pilfer code from myself as much as I want. How long have I been rambling on now? 47 minutes. Okay. Well, that's fun. So what to do next? I mean, I want to get it usable. That's the first thing, just so I could use it in a project theoretically. And so I want to sort of sort these by basic, MVP, actually being able to use it. So dry run is nice, but technically you don't need to do that to use it. You could just use it and, roll the dice. But it definitely it would be cool. A CLI, also not necessary. That's sort of, I'd like to do that soon, because you could do a whole bunch of commands. In fact, what are some commands we'd want? Well, we want, obviously, migrate, preview, snapshot, new migration, reset, I guess clean, which is just drop all. Oh yeah, rollback, of course. Disambiguate. Probably more commands. And I should eventually break these up into their own to-dos, because they're each going to maybe be different scopes, and probably other ones as well. Some kind of configure. Maybe that could allow you to edit that, whatever its conf file is, if it has one. So that would be pretty cool to have a CLI. And then just, connection, info, migrations path, yes. That's not really a to-do, that's a note. But I gave everything a to-do flag. Yeah. Oh, good. Oh yeah, and if a migration fails, the metadata is run back. Everything's rolled back. I did that. Not sure if I do want that on second thought. But I think I do, and I've done it. So that's nice. Rollback, obviously rollback would be pretty, I mean, that's basically something you're going to want to do with the CLI. You don't want to like put that in your code. You probably don't want to call migraine.rollback in your code, because that's something you do when you're messing around with things. Or administrating your database because something went horribly wrong. Snapshot CLI command, will I put that above under the CLI heading? Yeah, generating down migrations automatically. That would actually be a CLI command, but would be pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, it's actually, most of the work it seems is in the CLI. Generate, make down. I should probably turn these all into their own things. Preview. Yeah, make down migration. I don't know what to call that for real. It would be generating that. Configure. Dope. Can I do that again? Dot? No. Okay. Nothing is working very well with my Vim. Lots of commands. Lots of command ideas. And I will just push these all over a couple of spaces. No, it's... Commands, there we go. I like them to be lined up. Okay, cool. So lots of commands, many commands. CLI has a lot to do. So I think it's CLI would be the first thing to start. And obviously I want nice error messages. Roll back. Yeah, some of these are just like notes for quality of life. So I think those are the big ones. I guess that kind of decides it. I need a CLI. And then I need to figure out how to do the other stuff. Okay, well this is, I guess, mostly note-taking instead of coding, though there was some explanation at the beginning, so that's good. But yeah, I think I might take some time and just explore other CLIs for this and just see how they're configured and what feels the best, and just maybe take a look at Rails and other sort of migration tools and just get a sense of how can we idiomatically configure these things to run against the right context for each project and not have to pass in a whole bunch of parameters every time and feel really good. Maybe something interactive, maybe a whole front-end UI, maybe a micro app instead. But I think a CLI is really good because people would want to run this in on their whatever SSH into some server maybe. Okay, that's it for me today. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, I'll maybe do this again.